So we go from one iconic theater to the next. Tonight, Tar at the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Science Museum, brand new here, located on the corner of Wilshire Boulevard and Fairfax. Home to the original May Company department store way back when this used to be the fashionable boulevard in Los Angeles. Now across the street is the Peterson Museum, which is the Peterson Museum of Automotive, Cars and Motorcycles. But tonight we're going to the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences, TAR.
What's your number?
I do. What type of writing?
Any writers. I've got this group.
Hello, good evening. Thank you all for coming. I'm John Franson. After you see this absolutely terrific movie, I'm going to be hosting a brief conversation with the man behind it, Todd Field, and with three of the performers. That would be maybe your cue, Todd, to come out and say something into your mic. So we hope you enjoy the show. Please stick around for the conversation. But right now I'd like to bring out two of our performers, as John would say, Sophia Kauer and Cate Blanchett.
Thank you so much for coming out tonight, and I can't wait for you to see it on the big screen. It's been a long time since Todd has left the barn to make a movie, and I, for one, am profoundly grateful that he did so. I felt like he was holding our feet to the fire of something very special, and I hope you feel the same way when you see it tonight. Nina, Hoss, and Noemi Merlant are not here, and very much missed, and what an extraordinary cast of people, and what an extraordinary screenplay and movie, but for you to judge. Enjoy.
They said, go on stage. John, go. Here he is. So, Adam Gopnik was unavailable tonight. You get me. And I'm going to say just a few words about my own experience, seeing the film once only, which was, I was completely suspended. I was somewhere else for 2 hours and 37 minutes. And then the lights went up. I was like, what was that? What am I supposed to make of this? Which is which is unusual, I have to say. Usually you kind of get it in some way when you come to the end of the movie. I had no idea what I had just seen. And actually I went to bed not knowing, and got up the next day, and the movie was still totally there, which is, to me, the sign of a good, great movie. Are you still in it a day later? And one thing that became clear was that this was a portrait of a very, very specific, beautifully realized, both in the writing and in the performance, of a particular individual who is in the midst of destroying herself. That became, I could at least say that. And she was surrounded by people who were participating in that destruction or being destroyed with her, or by one person who's watching it happen. And then I still was like, what was the moral of this? Again, what was that? And it happened that I've been rereading one of my favorite Faulkner novels, and in the paperback edition there's this quotation on the back from Faulkner himself, which I'm going to read you. It's short, but it's kind of his own blurb, well, a quote from him used as a blurb on the book. "The writer's only responsibility is to his art." I can't do a Faulkner accent. "He will be completely ruthless if he's any good. Everything goes by the board: honor, pride, decency, security, happiness, all, to get the book written." Okay, some gendered language there, which is sort of unfortunate and kind of a weird thing to put on the back of the book, like, warning, the author is actually not a nice human being. But it occurred to me that maybe that's what's at the center of the film, which is the tension between being a good human being, one's responsibility to others, and then this responsibility to this like imperative, which is to try to make great art. So that is the end of my introductory remarks, and I have a question, and I might start with Todd, immediately to my left, and say, how much of tar is in you, dude? I'm warning, you all are going to get asked the same question.
Yeah, wow. Well, that's a very good question, John. I reckon quite a bit. You know, I mean, we see, you know, she's flawed. You know, she's hypocritical. She's capricious. She's clever. She's cagey. She makes her way around the world, you know, in a fairly familiar manner, I think, to me. You know, there's always like there's the good I that you wish you were, and then there's the person that you really are. And yeah, so I probably a fair amount, you know.
There's also the pursuing greatness in art part of that equation. It's not just about what you are as like as a person, but how the two things are in conflict. Are there moments when you actually have to be ruthless, the way Faulkner says?
Well, I think the act of creation is inherently selfish, you know. I mean, sometimes it's outside of life, and it doesn't play very well with life. It's not always very polite, you know.
Even though to the person who's involved in that art, it seems like, well, this is a higher good. It's okay to sacrifice all for that. It's like the way a religious fanatic might say, well, it's okay to blow some people up because I'm serving something else. I'm going to get to the youngest last, Sophie. I'm going to move to Ms. Blanchett.
The oldest. that's
I've got you beat there.
But that what you just said sounds slightly like a self-justification.
Well, I did say justification for blowing people up, and it's going to be a pretty hard justification, right?
But I mean, we create from so many different states, don't we? I mean, you know, I know this from many years of working in theatre, is that you have to have an objective third eye, but ultimately, if it's working, something is flowing through you and to an audience. And so you're saying the act of creation is selfish, but I mean, I know I have a profound and acute sense of audience. And so that, you know, that you have to sort of step out of the way of the thing, you know, in order to reach an audience. And sometimes you can get when you're making a piece of cinema, you can get very dislocated from your audience, and so therefore it can feel like it's some sort of indulgent, selfish thing. But I'm constantly thinking, you know, about the world in which we're living. And the weird thing about making a film is that, you know, we've talked about this a lot, Todd, is that when you're playing something as intense as this experience was, and you know, you said it was outside life, but I felt so alive making this. I don't know, more alive, I think, than I have felt for a very long time making anything. It alters your perspective on the world for the time that you're making it. So there feels like this profound privilege, in a way, that you step outside your kind of domestic groove and you start to look at the world through someone else's lens. So therefore, I feel like I'm more strangely in the world than if I was just in East Sussex feeding the pigs. Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean, and I very much fear that you're confirming a suspicion I had, which is that in addition to being amazing in like 18 different dimensions, you're also actually a really nice person, which is not
well,
very...
that's the act, John.
There we go, there we go. And Nina, as the person observing this from the outside, you play in the movie somebody who I think is kind of the emotional center. We have the grandness of the ambition of Lydia, and then we have people with whom, by Sharon's own account, she's in an instrumental relationship with the possible exception of her daughter Petra. But what is it like to be on the outside of a person like that? What is it like to play on the outside of a person who is that caught up in the grandeur of what she is? Because, I mean, just as an actress, say.
As an actress?
Yes.
Well, you know, yeah, when I listen to what you've just said, I do think the act of creation for sure has partly is selfish, but also you make yourself very vulnerable. And I think that's what Sharon sees. You put yourself out there. I think Lydia says you have to obliterate yourself at a certain moment. So that is, get rid of your ego, you know. So you do it to have an experience. And just on my way here, because I had a terrible flight ordeal today, it's on the plane, I just thought, I'm just going to listen to this Mahler symphony, you know? And I listened to it because we never get to really hear it. Yeah, we did hear it a lot, and Sophie as well, and Todd for sure. So, but I haven't listened to it for a long while, and it is so beautiful that you start crying, you feel happy, and she doesn't get to do it. And I think that's why she goes on stage at the end. That's why she, you know, and Sharon knows that. But she feels her slipping away. She has to deal with too many things. She has to lead this institution. But she doesn't get to do what she really wants to do, to create this sound, you know. And that, I find, is the hurt of Sharon, to having to watch that. And then at a certain point, because she is in her own right a very accomplished musician and has to save her family and her career, has to say enough. But yeah, so that it has to me, for me, it's also something to do with what a creative goes through. You know, everyone goes through. If you don't get to do what you want to do, that doesn't excuse everything. Lydia does, but it's just from Sharon's point of view.
But that is a harsh thing Sharon says. You say, as Sharon, every relationship in your life is transactional. That is really harsh, and something about that kind of rang true. And you could see, well, to get up, you actually have to engage in transactions, and then once you are conducting the not-to-be-named orchestra, sorry, the small joke there. I was not supposed to say the name of the orchestra. We're supposed to think that Lydia is conducting. Once you're there, you actually, in order to maintain that position, you actually continue to do the things you did when you were coming up. To me, that's much of the drama of the film, is those machinations, those conspiracies, and that kind of transactionality. Meanwhile, we have the ingenue of the picture, the very accomplished cellist, Sophie, making her film debut here, which is amazing. A credit to the actors, and I'm guessing a little bit of credit to the director too. I thought pretty much every performance in this movie was just like spot on, great. But there is the character, your character, doing some kind of dubious things, but doing them as a young person who presumably has kind of some sort of moral take on the transactional kind of bad behavior of the older characters. Were you thinking of that, or was it? How did you think about when you read the script? How did you think about your character in relation to all that?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think the nice thing about this movie is that you never quite know what she's doing. You don't know if she's calculating and this is her plan all along, or if she's just so young and free and caught up with her life that's seemingly going exactly to plan, and her achieving her wildest dreams, that, you know, she's just completely oblivious to all of it. And part of me would like to think that she is, but part of me also thinks that, you know, she's pretty smart. She's a pretty smart girl. You know, she might be able to kind of figure out what is going on. But I mean, I guess we live in a world where that kind of behavior is still quite common. And I think the release of this film is very timely, because there have been some studies released that show that this kind of behavior, as in from the kind of behavior demonstrated by Tara, is kind of at its worst in the classical music industry, along with like racism and bullying. So I think this film brings to light a lot of issues that our industry and many other industries face, and asks a lot of questions, and change doesn't come without questions being asked. So yeah, thanks, Todd.
Well, and thank you for calling those things out, actually, and that is what I kind of hoped you might say, that you took seriously the criticisms of that world that are implicit or maybe even explicit in the film. I found myself asking Todd right before we came out here, who took the score? How did that happen? And that leads to, actually, this is just a random question, but one of the reasons I stood up thinking, what was that, is that it's not like ABC storytelling. There's a lot of stuff that's inferred. There's a lot of stuff that we're left to try to puzzle out. I'm wondering, and I've never been involved in shooting a movie, so do you guys have to know, like, have in your own head, it worked out exactly what each of these things, like, do you know who took the score?
Yes.
You guys did. And did you discuss it?
It was patently obvious.
I'm going to let the four of you talk. Todd might have some questions. All right, it was painfully obvious. I was trying to channel those in the audience who might not be as quick as Kate.
But it is interesting. But it is interesting that you're talking about power, because I think, you know, to your question to Nina about what it's like to live with someone who's, you know, at the top of the kind of the cultural pyramid, supposedly pulling all the strings, is that I think that's what I loved about the screenplay, and I hope translates for an audience to the screen, is that it's very, very important to analyse these power structures, but it's also important to analyse the complicity of those people who may not be at the apex of that power, but who are complicit in keeping that power structure functioning, and who benefit on some level from allowing that power structure to exist without being culpable for it. And so in terms of who took the score, I mean, that's the, you know, there's a myriad of people who could have taken the score, right?
Indeed.
Yeah. So, I mean, for various different reasons. I mean, you know, and when you think about the conductors that I spoke to and the orchestra members that we spoke to, I mean, a conductor's reputation, and she could have been an architect or the head of a major banking corporation. I mean, the fact that it's set in sort of the grand narrative of the classical musical tradition is what it is right here, but in the same sense it's immaterial, is that we, you know, I do think that the film and really sort of asks the questions rather than answers the questions about how those power structures in the contemporary world are still allowed to exist and who benefits from them.
But many of those power structures are controlled by men, and certainly the conductor of that symphony would likely have been male. So I'm curious about your choice, Todd, to do a pretty complete gender reversal. We have a female concert master, played by Nina, and we have the female conductor, and we have, although somewhat dubiously, we have we have two actually female cellists. That's not so unusual, but the point is, you really did do an almost complete flip in terms of the gender power thing. Tell me about that choice.
Well, as Sophie was saying, you know, this is a long sort of stain in classical music, and it's typically white and it's male, and whether you're familiar with classical music or not, you know, as she says, well, there's so much of this in the news lately. And that's a potentially very limiting lens to look at what Kate's describing in terms of power and who benefits from it and who feeds it and what's on one, you know, end of the telephone line and what's on the other end. So it seemed important that if you're making a film that's trying to ask some questions about a power structure, to the abstraction of it actually is super useful, because potentially it makes you have an opportunity to look at it slightly differently in an almost fairy tale-like, because it is almost a fairy tale, because with the exception of, say, the great, great conductors that we have that are female, like Maren Alsop or Natalie Stutzman and the like, there are very few, you know, and there's still very few opportunities for women, and there's more orchestras today than at any other time, and those positions must be filled, and yet there's still limited opportunities, and there's still never been a principal conductor for an orchestra like this ever in history. I mean, when I interviewed players at the Dresden Philharmonic, one of the violists, I remember we just, you know, asked them, was it different for you? Was it different for you being a female player coming up than, say, one of your male counterparts? And she said, well, let me just give you an example. And she was not an old, well, she was younger than me. I don't think I'm pretty old, but she said, when I came up, I was the first female violist to ever play for the Munich Orchestra in their 450-year history. Now this is today, right? So that should just be a fact. The idea that we're thinking about gender at all is absurd, you know. And there is a sort of absurd element to this.
So, let's say in a fairy tale world, things were completely flipped. Do you, and this is a question for the women, do you think it would function in exactly the same way if, like, magically overnight, every powerful male in that business were replaced by a powerful woman? Would there be any difference? Or is power really its own thing that is actually kind of divorced from the power dynamics of gender in society?
Well, I may have been living under a rock, but I haven't experienced a matriarchal structure yet. I don't.
You don't know exactly. It could be great.
Look what's happening in Iran, and as soon as one single woman stands up, then women all around, and then this country, what's happening to be back to freedom. I mean, it's not just about the classical music world, but in this particular instance, I think that there are grand narratives that stretch back into time, and that there are extraordinary female composers whose works are only just now in this last century coming to light. But the great works, considered the quote-unquote great works, the big orchestral works, are by and large, because of circumstance, composed by men. And so it sort of leans towards a certain structure of making the music. But still, in the research that I did, it was absolutely shocking to go back and watch conductors from 20 years ago, and recordings of rehearsal processes, and to look around the orchestra, as you were pointing to, Todd, and there might have been maybe one flautist, one musician who was female, but the entire orchestra was female. The entire construction of the way the work was put out there, then disseminated, that it was because it was a high art, it had to be made by men. So I don't know yet, because we haven't even seen those things in action in any way. But I do think, I'm sorry, I don't want to put words into your mouth, Todd, but because this film is so much about the examination of power and what happens when your feet are held close to power and the corrupting nature of power, I think you would have had a much less nuanced engagement with those questions if the central players were men.
We would have mapped it immediately onto what we already know.
Yeah, I think so.
In this town, for example, yeah. Sorry. I don't live in this town, so I can't.
John lives in Northern California.
Only people who don't live in this town call it this town. Probably didn't answer your question.
No, you actually did, and I wish I fear abstraction if we pursue this much further in this direction. So about the playing of the music, we see your hands a little bit. You play the music yourself. You can play piano, apparently.
Apparently
Yes.
so, although
Yes, apparently
Todd
so.
and I had a few arguments. I said, dude, you can't see my fingers. It's like, no one's going to be thinking. But, he just said, that's just a rubbish. So don't worry about that. But yes.
Yes.
Everything in the film is played by these wonderful actresses, and it's all live recordings. So, super scary.
Super scary.
It's super authentic, and exactly how it is in real life. But I mean, Yeah, another round of applause for these amazing women. Come on. Yeah. So what did you do it so properly? Yeah, okay, sorry.
I was, I came out, another thing I was thinking when I came out was like, how does Todd know so much about classical music? Like, I know he does a lot of research when he writes his scripts, but I thought, this is like over the top. This is like, he must have read for years in this stuff. And then I remembered, you actually started out you started out in music conservatory, right?
I did.
Your background is in music.
It is in music, but it wasn't in concert music. I was a total, like very young and very certain and very snobbish about anything that wasn't straight ahead jazz. So, no, it did take a fair amount of research, and I actually, I found this really great vein, which is, I read this book called For the Love of Music by John Mauceri. And John Mauceri, for many years, some people here, I'm sure, are familiar with John. Yeah, John, ran the movie nights for the LA Phil at the Hollywood Bowl for many years, and he had been Leonard Bernstein's one of his assistants, and he had been the only person that was ever allowed to conduct Bernstein's own compositions while he was still living, and he taught at Yale, et cetera, et cetera. So I had about 3.5 weeks with John, and he kind of said, okay, read this, do that, read that, this is what you should know. And also because he had been out here for so long, he'd been around films. And so he didn't know what I was doing, but when I would say, hey, there's this thing I want to do, is it plausible? And he'd say, well, maybe if you did it like that, and I'd say, well, that doesn't work, could I do it like that? So I could bounce things off of him. So it was a very, very intense period of time. It was the very beginning of the lockdown. I had 3.5 weeks with him, and then I started the script. So it was a crash course in concert music, to be honest with you.
And obviously, Sophie, seeing the script, would think, oh, well, I could play cello, and I'd like to be in a movie about music. That makes a lot of sense with your music background. What about you? What were your first takes, Nina and Kate, when you heard from Todd about this project? Did you have any of the sense I had, which is, what is this? Or did you get it immediately and know what you could do with it?
No, I had the same feeling. I was completely overwhelmed, but I was so excited by it. I read the script and I thought I understood half or even less, but I'm really excited about it because it talks about so many things, and amongst it about music and people I hadn't heard of, and the things Todd talks about, and I think, oh my God, that's how you think about it. Oh, that's what a conductor does. So I was immediately drawn into this world and into these characters. But I was first like you, what was that? And it's so interesting when I see the film. I've seen it now 3 times, and every time I see something else, and I pick something else out there. Sometimes it's the power structure I'm really interested in, and then it's the watching these creatives fight for what they're doing, and that's what I'm interested in. So that to me was really amazing, and it's very seldom that a script and a project like that comes your way where you.
Listening to you all, and by the way, I don't have a clock on our time, so I don't know how much time we have left. But do we have time left? I don't know where we are. They're
whispering behind.
I heard whispering. That is what put the thought in my head. It's like what? It's 10 o'clock. Is that the witching hour?
Yeah, we should let everybody go.
We should let everybody go.
Thank you for
it's late.
staying.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you all.
Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more movie-related content coming soon.